Hi, this is RuthAnnTALKS with a topic for musicians, performing musicians, the kind that play for live audiences and perform music that they've had to prepare and then rehearse once and then produce. I'm more or less doing this video, to find out if there's anybody who shares my strange handicap, which is, how many of you need a visual field on the page that is familiar to you? By familiar, I mean every mark on the page has to be recognizable. The print and what you've put there with pencil. Now, my mind, I've finally figured this out after being baffled for a long time, that if I put a number under a note for a fingering for the cello part, and then I put another number a little bit later in the same bar, and I cover the page with occasional numbers, those numbers written in pencil become integral to the entire visual field, the entire map of that piece of music. I don't read analytically. I read photographically. If there are numbers, see those little 4s and 2s? Those are for me. They indicate what position I'm going to be playing a passage in. Now, a stringed instrument is kind of like a test of permutation for you math wizards. We have as many as 3 and sometimes 4 possible ways to perform a given line of music, depending on what positions we've chosen to use to get to the passage and to articulate it. I could put my 4th finger on a note. I could put my 3rd finger on the same note. I could put my 1st finger on that note. I might even put my 2nd finger on that note, and everything that follows follows accordingly, depending on whether I'm in 2nd or 3rd or half position, and so forth, to play what appears to pianists to be a very simple line. Now, I play the piano professionally as well, so I know the difference between the demand of both instruments. A piece of music that looks easy to one instrumentalist who doesn't play the instrument that is required to perform it isn't really the better judge of whether that part is easy or difficult. It's all up to the player and their knowledge of the instrument. But back to this fingering the part. Now, I finger the piano parts that I play as well. And the fingerings are, man, they are required once they're on the page for me to execute the passage. I have to have my fingerings, mine, not mine and somebody else's. If somebody else's are placed in there above mine or above the notes and mine are below, I have to get used to seeing those there, because they haven't been part of my visual field. They're not part of my musculo-visual memory, my opto-visual memory, my optomuscular memory. So if I'm rehearsing beside somebody, it's annoying to that player for me to say, I need to see your fingerings. Could you please put them in the part so that I can get used to seeing them there in order to be prepared to perform. Now, classically, and when I say classically, I mean conservatory trained musicians who are my colleagues have done the rudimentary scale work. They've done all the pattern making in college for 4 years. It's all already imprinted in their brain. I'm kind of a freak. I don't have those imprints. I've never had them, and I've played for 30-some years without them. So every time I get a piece of music, the map is the thing I need. I have no previously established patterns that I can impose on a passage and say, oh, that's a scale passage. Or, oh, I've seen that in the Popper Etude 22. Ain't going to happen for me. So I'm kind of handicapped. I need the numbers, and I need them placed beneath the notes precisely where I've been practicing them at home once I've chosen the fingering I'm going to use. And if I choose a fingering, that's the one I'm going to perform. I can't make modifications on the spot and say, oh, the music that you just handed me that is the same as mine except it has different fingerings, I'll tell you about that later. I can't read that. I can't read it unless I impose my fingerings on that part, exactly the way they appear on the part I've been practicing. And it doesn't matter the relative difficulty or ease of a particular passage. It could be very easy music, but I will muff a passage in performance if my numbers aren't there at the critical juncture of the one and only rehearsal we get before we perform it. In certain situations, when you're in the pickup orchestra, you have one chance. I played last night for a crowd of several hundred people, and I had one rehearsal, just like everybody else in the pit. But my needs are a little bit picayune. They're a little bit idiosyncratic. I have to see my numbers. So I took the time to put all of my fingerings in the first act, but I didn't take the time to put them in the second act. I thought I was okay. Don't make that mistake. Your visual field, your template for reading when you're performing, I wonder if athletes can relate to this in any way, like divers maybe. They have to take X number of steps at X number of intervals on the board and end up at the tip of the board precisely when their body needs to be there in order to execute the entire maneuver. I'm guessing. I'm guessing that's probably true of a diver who's diving from a very great height and doing somersaults and twists. Sounds a little bit arrogant of me to compare myself to an Olympic diver, but I think the muscle memory, the kinetic memory, as well as all the visual field elements have to be in place, and they have to be rehearsed, and then they have to be duplicated exactly, or errors might be made. So I'm putting this particular video out there for the musicians who don't understand why they made a dumb mistake in a performance in an easy passage. It might be because the visual field doesn't feel familiar. Now, in the instance of a pickup orchestra, when the music is issued as practice part via email attachment, you print out all your parts, you practice them at home. But then when you get to the site of the performance, you are handed the actual part that's not printed out by your printer. Usually it's a long piece of paper, it folds out. But it may or may not have marks on it from the previous user, the previous player who performed that gig in another city. And those markings may or may not be profuse. They might be minimal. They might be disgustingly rampant on the page. But in my case, if there are any at all, written by somebody else on music I'm supposed to perform, they distract me. Furthermore, we're not allowed to erase what's on the music that we're handed. We have to leave it that way. So, I had a really difficult lick to play in a piece called Oh Holy Night that was performed in the pit for an acrobatic dramatic troupe. And I had practiced, I'd probably played that 100 times. And I could play it with my eyes shut. I could play the whole thing with my eyes shut, and I should have. Because there was a 2 that someone else had put above a note at a particular juncture in that, way up on the fingerboard. And in performance, my brain looked at that 2 and did a double take and said, oh yeah, right, no, wait, no, too late. Too late. I had to sort of back off for a couple beats and get my bearings and finish the passage. And I could have played that thing with my eyes shut, and it would have been in tune and just right. The agony and the ecstasy of a performing musician, and the irony. So, if you are visually photographic, if your memory is sort of photographic, not so much so that you would claim to have the entire page memorized. I don't mean that. I'm saying if you're visually dependent on every mark you've made on your page, and then someone plunks a different part in front of you and asks you to perform it in front of thousands of people, you might trip a little bit. And I don't mean trippy. I mean you'll stumble. And if it's exposed and people hear it, there are no words for the hole in your soul that you have to carry home afterwards. We work so hard. I can't tell you the number of hours I put in on the easiest music to make every note in tune, to control my bow, to place my bow, to control the bow's speed, the vibrato intensity, the shape of the phrase. And then to have to trip on some stupid eighth note string crossing oscillation and be misjudged as some kind of dilettante who just claims that she can play. These are the things. I just wonder how many performing musicians endure this kind of thing, or if they've overcome it, or if it's just me because I'm a step skipper, because I didn't play all the etudes. I didn't play the excerpts. I don't have these imprints. I have to have my print on the page exactly the way it's going to be. And then I'll play it every bit as well as the person sitting beside me. This I've proved time and again. People tell me that. But I need my music, and I need the numbers that I put on my page. Every little dash and dot, and even the shape of the number and the size of it, is all part of how I read the abstraction called the image on the page, the notation. So I'm going to put this one out on social media, and I hope that there are some professional musicians who can even at least understand what I'm talking about, and then maybe comment. Sounds like a weak excuse for a less than perfect rendition. But it's pretty agonizing because the solution is simple if somebody would just let me have my part and use my music all the time. But that's not the way it is it? The conditions in the world do not bow at our feet, do they? Okay, I had to do this the night before the big one. Tomorrow's the big deal. It's going to be fun. We get to wear click-track earphones. Mannheim is one of the best shows in the world, and we get to play. I get to play tomorrow for Mannheim Steamroller. But I'm not talking about that show. That's different. Those parts that they give us won't be scribbled on. They won't have been previously used by some dilettante who put bad fingerings in. They'll have just the indications we need, and we'll be able to fill in lightly with pencil what we need as well. I'm not worried about that at all. So if you're a professional musician and you've endured this sort of thing, it's not about the difficulty of the music. It's about what you're looking at when you're playing it and how you perceive what you see. You get me? Hope so. Sleep well. Tomorrow we do it all again.